Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all those who've joined. Maybe we'll give it 30 seconds more to see if anyone else is joining, and we'll get started. We just want to make sure the screen is being shared. So please give us a few more seconds. Okay. So I would like to welcome everyone to joining this Anatomy of Account Takeover webinar hosted by Mozen. My name is Rabi Zubairi, and I'm joined with two other speakers here today. I'll shortly introduce them. Thank you to everyone who's joined from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and maybe across the world. We really appreciate you for taking your time out for this. Okay, first I want to start by introducing Mozen. What is Mozen? Mozen was a company born in Riyadh in 2017. We have about 200 plus employees, and our main focus is on AI, anti-money laundering, and various kind of other artificial intelligence solutions for the fintech sector and other technology sectors across Saudi Arabia, a greater Middle East, and hopefully globally as well. FOCAL is Mozen's flagship product. This one is mostly focused on anti-money laundering, anti-fraud, and that nature of kind of work. The main benefit of FOCAL is the Arabic phonetics engine. So compared to our other competitors, the main kind of benefit we provide is being able to ingest data in Arabic and English, being able to process that data and provide you results with higher accuracy. This, obviously was really helpful in the Middle East region for our users. Okay. Next, I want to introduce you to our kind of new organization or new department that we have created called the Focal Point. So the Focal Point is a dedicated center powered by top data scientists and industry experts, focused on uncovering and preventing emergent fraud patterns. Our mission is to empower businesses proactively prevent fraud and financial crime through in-depth research, reports, webinars, and thought leadership. This is kind of a new department introduction, and as we move forward, you'll probably hear about this more and more if you follow Mozen and kind of the research that we are doing around fraud and the latest trends we are discovering. So what's the agenda for today? We're going to learn about account takeover, in short, what we like to call ATOs, what kind of methods fraudsters use to perform ATOs, what are some real-world case studies that we have in our records, business impacts of ATOs, prevention strategies, and future trends that we are seeing ATOs and how they can help fight ATOs and fraud in the future. I want to introduce our speakers today. Suleiman Nour, he's our staff product manager, especially on the fraud tool, and Mr. Gerrit Bekker, who is the director of data science, lead data scientist here at Mozen, supporting the FOCAL product. So, Suleiman, I want to turn this over to you. I have some questions for the webinar. So really, the first question is, can you explain what is an account takeover? Why is it a significant threat to organizations?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabi, and good morning to everyone joining online. Absolutely. So account takeover is basically a technical term. It means that an unlawful access has happened, right? An unlawful access by someone with the intent to defraud the customer, to defraud the institution that holds that account, right? And then later on do further fraudulent activities, whether it be to deplete the account out of its money, or actually use it as a mule later on. It's a very serious offense, right? It has a serious impact on the person who's being defrauded, the institution that this type of fraud or typology of fraud is happening at, and the economy as a whole, right? A quick example can be something like along the lines, you're a busy guy, you're doing something important, and then you get a call from someone or like an SMS from someone, and that person or like that fraudster got your credentials somewhere, like through data breaches. We're gonna get to typologies or like how actually the techniques happen, but they got your credentials, but now they wanna overcome the two-factor authentication, right? It's a great idea that you have two-factor authentication, but now they want to get something out of you. They want to get an information out of you to use it later on to complete the process of the account takeover. So again, you're a busy guy, you're expecting a call, someone calls you, luck struck out for that fraudster, and then without you knowing, you share that information, that OTP or like that two-factor authentication. And then as soon as you do that, the fraudster have full control over your account, right? Now, again, it's a serious offense. In 2023, for example, like the amounts that have been taken over are in excess of $13 billion. So it's a very big industry and has a really impact, whether it be here in the region or globally.
Got it. Got it. So, what are some account takeover trends that we have witnessed, or you and being in the industry have witnessed, and how have ATO attacks become more sophisticated in recent years?
Absolutely. So as we've seen, account takeover is in the rise, whether it be globally, regionally, and locally, right? It's a growing industry. Year on year, we've seen growth in that typology of fraud. Now, maybe three reasons why this is happening. One is digitization of services led to ease of access to the regular customer, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, also made it easier for fraudsters to take over accounts and do further operations online, right? So it's like you open the door, and unfortunately, a lot of people are accessing the system that you didn't want them to access. Additionally, the digitization itself, or like the attacks themselves, have been more sophisticated. So fraudsters are utilizing very complex attacks, utilize social engineering and the like, right, to defraud people. So they like financial or like institutions overall are playing catch up with these fraudsters. They come up with a new methodology to attack their customers. The fraudsters, like the institutions, would then overcome them, and then the fraudster will find another hole, and so on and so forth. And finally, the current way of overcoming account takeover is not working and is not effective, right? It relies mostly on looking at few attributes and not holistically understanding who's my customer and fixating on certain aspects of their behavior rather than having a holistic view of that. And then we can talk about that later on. But in summary, it's digitization led to ease of access. Secondly, the attacks have becoming more sophisticated and will continue to be so. And the current solutions that are in place are not effective at overcoming that typology of fraud.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I remember maybe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, most of my personal life really was mostly emails. That was my personal information, maybe bank accounts and such. But now recently I found I've so many apps that I have accounts on, and all kinds of data about my life are on these apps. So it makes sense why anyone would want to, even if they got access to partial of one of the apps that I have access to, it could be devastating for me and my, financial health.
Absolutely, and especially
Yeah.
in this region, everything is digitized here. So absolutely.
Yeah. What are some common techniques that you see fraudsters using, and which industries specifically do you see that should be preparing for high regulatory scrutiny related to ATOs?
Absolutely. So when it comes to techniques, the fraudsters use are evolving, right? They start with something, and then they get caught, and then they evolve and try something else, right? So these things are always evolving, and this is one of the reasons why we established actually the focal point, which is the people who will keep an eye on all of these trends and keep figuring out ways to overcome them. But maybe when you look at it in terms of typologies or like archetypes types, a few major themes appear, right? First is related to credential stuffing with device spoofing. Basically, the fraudster use stolen credentials online, right, through data breaches, through a lot of other, let's say, cyber attacks. They get your information, they get your credentials, and then they combine this with with device spoofing. Basically, they try to let's say mask the identity of their devices, mask the identity of who they are, basically, so that they can overcome the controls that you have as as an institution in place, right? And appear as like a legitimate access, a legitimate customer. So botnets and automated tools, again, like they're part of that. They try to, again, mimic regular customer behavior and then try to access the system. You have social engineering, like an umbrella that encompasses a lot of techniques of how account takeover happens. And usually the vulnerability or like the weak point here is actually the customer, because again, all of us are busy people, and without knowing, we might be sharing information that is critical for the fraudster to take over the account. Another method is device simulation, right? So they use, like, again, these are a bit technical terms, but they use emulators to impersonate legitimate devices. An emulator is like let's say, a thing that allows you to mimic whether like an iOS app, an Android app, or like a desktop access. And they utilize this, again, to hide who they truly are and then deceive the other systems in the institutions to bypass it also. So these are like maybe another technique that maybe we're going to talk about later on also is SIM swapping. Again, they do not attack you; they attack other institutions, and then they do something called SIM swaps, where they change the number from the victim to their number, and then utilize this number to conduct further fraudulent activities, whether it be opening new accounts or actually taking over other accounts in other institutions. So these are like the major techniques of fraud. Now, when it comes to the industry, the second part of your question, the industries are married. There are industries that are regulated and industries that are not regulated. At the top of the list would be definitely financial institutions, like banks, fintechs, and payment processors, and all of those. Typically, they are a prime attack, like a prime victim of these attacks, because the fraudsters have that and the incentive to do that. They directly attack these institutions, and then they have direct access to financial funds, and then they utilize these funds and wire them somewhere else, or to buy online, or do a lot of operations later on, so whether through mule or online payment or card not present transactions. Another industry is e-commerce, maybe less regulated, but still face the same issue. E-commerce and digital e-commerce specifically, where fraudsters again will try to take over the account, abuse the system, abuse the fact that some of these payment methods are like some people save the payment methods and then utilize this and to defraud the customer and to defraud the institution. And actually, the e-commerce platform are in a double whammy in terms of, okay, now when this happens, typically the customer will complain, and then they'll have to do a chargeback, and like the fraudster got what they wanted, got the gift card or whatever, and now they need to return the money back to the customer, and also they've already lost some goods in the process. Thirdly, you'll have telecommunication. Again, we talked briefly about SIM swaps. SIM swaps is a major threat vector in the telecommunication aspect, and phone numbers in Saudi are like very important, I think, for people who live here and maybe all over the region. Like phone numbers are part of your identity online. You open a lot of accounts using your phone numbers. Like a lot of institutions here rely on that to authenticate who you truly are. So when SIM swap happen, it's really devastating, because now your banking accounts are tied to that, your other accounts are tied to that, right? And SIM swaps basically is, okay, I have a SIM in my phone and I want to move it to another device. If it's a lawful thing, it's fine, right? I move my SIM from device A to device B. But if it's unlawful, it's really devastating. And what they do is they attack the apps of these telecommunication operators, and then do the SIM swaps. And once that happened, again, they employ also social engineering in the process. When this happened, they have full control of these phone numbers, and then they can passwords in banking apps, and then take like critical impact on the customer, right? And finally, like the final industry would be government and the public sector, right? Again, we have a lot of digital apps. They employ two-factor authentication, all of that. But again, as we mentioned before, there are ways to overcome this, and fraudsters are utilizing this to overcome the system.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of, I had a question that popped in my mind while you were discussing this. And I don't know, maybe if you know the answer to this or not, but do you think there's a difference between devices, personal devices versus, commercial devices, or maybe like a phone I have for me personally versus a phone issued by my company? Do you think data breaches, takeovers have different behaviors for those two, or kind of the same?
Yeah, so it really depends on the behavior of the customer, right? It doesn't matter if it's a business or like a commercial use, right? Each one of these, if it's a lawful act, will have a certain profile and a certain way of operating. And the critical thing is that you understand the difference between what's normal and what's not normal, right? So this is the way you tackle it. You establish a baseline of what is a normal activity, and then when something deviates from that behavior, this is a flag that you need to take into consideration. And definitely, it's more in depth, like it's more detailed than that. Maybe we can go over it in the next questions that come. But basically, it's the ability to understand what's an anomaly and what's not, and utilize this to protect your customers.
Got it. Interesting. So how are regulators increasingly focusing on ATO attacks, and what compliance measures are expected coming from them?
Yeah, so definitely, it's like for regulated industries, they are continuously enhancing and asking more from financial institutions or other institutions alike, right? So we've seen the counterfeit framework from SAMA, and we've seen from other like regulators the same thing. They're like increasing and adopting and continuously updating these controls. Actually, for this is for regulated industries, and for other regulated industries, like what we're seeing, the trend is that they're becoming regulated, right? So they're being asked, and there are plans to actually ask them and to have something like the counterfeit framework from SAMA or the cyber security framework from their part. So the trend is more regulations and more responsibility on the institutions to protect their customers from these typologies of fraud. And this is a trend we've seen globally. Now, when it comes to maybe two major trends that are happening there that we've continuously seen from our experience is that regulators are asking institutions to adopt a risk-based approach, right? We've heard that a lot across anti-fraud and across even AML, right? So they wanna, but in fraud, it's more into the authentication part rather than the AML part. But like they're asking for a risk-based authentication, right? So they're saying, okay, you have a credential mechanism where you ask people to securely have a password and a username, and you have a two-factor authentication. No, that's not enough. You need to take into consideration other aspects, right? It's not enough just to have these two controls and say, yes, I've done everything that I could in my disposal. No, actually, they want now you to monitor other signals of fraud that are typically not monitored. So specifically, it's really the digital footprint of the customer, right? So these apps collect a huge amount of data, and they're saying, like, why aren't you utilizing this to develop a profile of your customer, to develop a footprint of this customer, and utilize things like location changes, new devices being accessed, the frequency of all of that, like the browser configurations, and all of these things, right? So the theme here is that regulators are asking for a risk-based authentication rather than a passive and a static one. Now, the second trend is the proactive approach, right? So they're asking more and more that you would need to have a real-time anomaly detection and real-time fraud prevention, right? So it's not only enough to do that and detect that post-fact. You need to actually prevent it before it happens, because this is critical and important. And actually, it makes a lot of sense for the businesses themselves, right? So that's another angle. Like when you do this real time, you'll be able to have more products in place and protected. So real time detection is another thing that we've seen regulators continuously asking. What does this mean for compliance? Is that they need to adopt a new way to tackle these challenges. Specifically, they need to have a comprehensive profiling with the customer, not only just the profile of the customer using KYC data and other risk, other let's say like other specific snapshot in time metrics. You need to holistically look at your customer, holistically look at their transactional history, and holistically looking at their non-transactional history, and utilize this to develop a profile beyond the customer profile only. So you need to have also comprehensive device profiling and non-financial profiling, right? The second thing is you need to have a continuous monitoring system. Again, it doesn't mean that you do one facet of your customer behavior in one point of time. You need to continuously monitor that 24/7. And finally, it's transparent, like transparency and auditability of these systems that you have, right? So, like regulators are asking for AI, at the same time they're asking you need to understand, and we need to understand what's happening. So the concept of a black box AI model is not really something that people are looking for, but rather they want you to utilize technology, but at the same time you need to be able to understand what's happening and understand and be able to explain if needed. So this auditability and transparency is important.
Got it. Very interesting. I want to move a little bit to a kind of a second topic, which is what is the impact of account takeovers on a business? How does it affect a business? Why should even a business be concerned about this? So if you can go over that, what are the immediate and long-term financial consequences of ATO incidents on businesses?
Absolutely. So I believe the slide maybe summarizes it well, and I believe a lot of the audience and the people are very familiar with that. So I'll not spend a lot of time here, but it's very clear. Like account takeover impact the business, whether it be from a cost side or like the revenue side. So from the cost side, you have a lot of operational costs, right? You need to employ more people. You need to enhance the processes that you have, right? And all of these things add up together, and then you will find that okay, you know what? From a operational perspective, I have a lot of costs just because I want to overcome account takeover. Revenue loss is another thing, right? Because now you're afraid of account takeover. You're not as bold as you want to be when it comes to launching new businesses, launching new products in the market. And actually, this will delay. Typically, what happens is that because of these typologies of fraud, these products are not going to market as soon as they should be. Again, and entirely reputational damage. Like we've seen these attacks, we've seen social media reacting to these. Sometimes when these attacks happen at a wider scale or like in a frequent manner, these institutions that are that these things are happening are unfortunately under a lot of scrutiny from the public, and it might impact their brand and it might impact their reputation. And finally, definitely, like for regulated industry specifically, you will find that regulations are heavy and there are fines and you need to comply. And if you're not implementing the right solutions, you'll get fined again and then again, right? So in summary, operational costs, revenue loss, and reputation damage, combined with legal implications, are what's expected from or the impact of account takeover on your business. Here, I maybe, unless there is another question, Rabi, I might want to maybe share a story of from our own experience here at Muzen of
Sure.
seeing that impact firsthand, and basically how what were the mechanisms that we utilized to overcome them. We worked with one of the leading digital wallets with millions of customers, right? They have diverse a suite of products and offering, transfers, top up, and e-commerce. And before we worked with them, they saw a surge in fraudulent activities, and specifically they saw a surge of account takeover related activities, device-based account takeover, and muling, right? We worked closely with the fraud manager and the fraud head. He was a very young guy, very bright guy, very smart, right? But continuously overwhelmed by these new vectors of fraud, right? There is regulator pressure, like there is pressure coming from SAMA, there is pressure coming from the business stakeholders that want to launch new products, but are being blocked by the fraud management and the typologies of fraud that they're facing. And he's also pressured or like cornered by playing catch up with fraudsters, right? So he will deploy a solution, he will deploy a control, he will deploy a scenario, and then in few weeks the fraudsters would have overcome this, and then they would find a way to overcome it and defraud the regular customers. Now, we worked, like, this is the time where we went into with the focal point, right? So we had a team of people dedicated to help that customer, and at the same time also we deployed a few of the solutions that we have at place, whether it be that we may be coming over next. The impact, my colleague Gerrit will walk you through maybe some of the models that we worked with and some of the things that we utilized to overcome and detect these fraudsters, but I'll jump directly to the impact. The impact is a reduction of fraud by 8%, right? So this is something that we're really proud of, and we're really happy that with this customer, like this client, was able to do that. And the impact is also a streamlined process, right? Now, this fraud manager, right, who's very brilliant, very smart, utilizes now the time that they have at their disposal, right? Before they needed to do a lot of things, a lot of catch up. Now they have more time in their hand. They're able to do more investigation into their customers, support internal stakeholders in business to launch new products that have a good impact on the business overall, and also to manage the regulator, right? So they utilize this free up time to do a lot of good things for the company. Yes, so we understand, like, the message here is that we understand that ATO is a daunting problem. However, I think the combination of the right talent and solution might help, and this is something that we want to share the experience that we have overall. And I'll leave it to my colleague Gerrit to walk us through a few of the controls that helped a lot and cover this typology of fraud.
Yeah. Before I guess we jump to Gerrit, I just wanted to quickly highlight most people generally when they think of fraud, ATO even, the main focus is on the money that's lost or the financial loss. But one thing really interesting you mentioned here is that the time, right? When a second concept was fraud is always a cat and mouse game. Fraudsters are always trying to get ahead of the regulators, and regulators are always trying to keep up with the fraudsters. And really, any kind of solution, any kind of tool that can help you reduce that gap and also save you time, I believe, can be highly valuable in today's economy. So very interesting. I'll turn it over to Gerrit now. Gerrit, if you want to walk us through the insights on this case study and what were the results? You're on mute, by the way, Gerrit.
Sure.
You're on mute again.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ruby, and good morning to the audience, and thank you for joining the webinar. Just following up on what Suleiman mentioned before, so the data science team, we've got an enviable task. It's enjoyable, but it's also challenging at the same time, really, to help our clients to detect and prevent fraud. And we've got multiple tools available. Fortunately, technology has come a long way in recent years, and specifically processing power and data makes our job certainly a lot easier. I'm going to take you through a case that we experienced with one of our prominent clients, specifically when we onboarded them as on our fraud platform and in fraud prevention systems. Really, what happened, what we saw, and how we basically minimized the impact, and then eventually closed down what we would call advanced account takeover attack or account takeover chain. The tools that we use, basically, as Suleiman mentioned before, we built models and machine learning models and database models in the background, and then we basically used these ones to create data-driven rules that we then deploy in our real-time engine. And the advantage of this is that we've got full explainability, but also low latency. But we are also experimenting, obviously, in deploying real-time machine learning models in future, and specifically ones that are highly expandable to cover the gaps. The rule systems are effective, but we can make the systems better. So there's always a constant evolution in the products that we provide and we build. The fraudsters are clever, and they're always sort of finding new weaknesses and new ways to exploit systems. But let me jump into the specific case study. Basically, one of the tools that we use is called a graph database or graph network, and it comes from social networks in basically how people in the social network would interact. And what we've done is we created something similar where we would look at a financial ecosystem, and specifically on our devices, accounts, and account holders interact in that ecosystem. The graph network is really powerful in that it gives us the ability to create features and rules that are highly predictive to detect and stop fraud. On this side, we've got a picture, and we can basically see there's basically blue dots and white dots. The white dots are basically customers, and the blue dots are devices that the customer uses to connect to their accounts. Typically, what we see is sort of this one-to-one relationship where I've got a device and I've got an account, and it's completely legitimate and understandable. But what our system also detects are these account takeover chains, and this is the beginning of a chain where you can see one device that is basically accessing multiple accounts. So this is the fraudster, and these are the legitimate owners of the account. So this fraudster and this fraudster on this side and this one here have found mechanisms basically to exploit the system and gain access to the accounts. What we do at this point in time is that we basically still allow access to the accounts, but we don't allow the fraudster to transact. And we want to do that specifically to track the entire fraud network. So it's too early to close the fraud network down at this point in time. If I move on to the next slide, same picture, but a little bit later. The previous picture is basically this middle part. And now we can see that the fraud network is starting to grow. There's two additional nodes that have attached. And typically it's attached by a mule. So basically what the guys would do is they would try first gain access to their accounts. And once they've got access to the accounts, they would try and transfer that money out of the system so they can basically convert it into cash or even move it out of the country. And this is basically where the graph network is especially powerful in that we start building what we call a suspicious cluster or highly suspicious cluster. Typical methods will potentially miss this. These would potentially pick up the one device accessing multiple accounts, but the graph network gives us the ability to link all of this together. And as I said, at this point in time, we're minimizing the impact that these fraudsters have, so they can gain access to accounts, but they can't transfer money. And we wait until the right time until we see that the fraud ring or the fraud network is mature. This one is also indicative of botnet activity. So it's what we pick up is highly organized attacks on multiple accounts. And these are typically done via automated processes. So this particular fraud ring is more sophisticated. You get your ad hoc guys that are more manual and they're exploitative and opportunistic. These guys are definitely using far more advanced. So the amount of damage they can do is significant if it's not minimized and controlled. And then I'll move on to the next phase. So now we're basically getting to a point where the network is mature and stable. We can see that this is the original one, and there's some satellite activities that's happened. We can also see devices attacking multiple accounts, and multiple accounts. We're looking at literally hundreds of accounts that's being attacked by a few devices, and all being connected by sort of your sort of the orchestrators within the system. So basically, and here's an example basically. So you've got device A that will log into account 1. Device A will also log into account 2, and then device B will log into account 2. Before we weren't able to track device A and device B, but now we know that device A and device B basically belong to the same fraud network because they're basically accessing the same accounts. And really the reason here is to basically discover hidden patterns. So what the fraudsters will do is they're sort of aware of how most of the systems work. So they deploy techniques to sort of hide the activities, specifically to human observers. But fortunately, we've got our machine learning models that run in the background that detect these patterns. Now we've got basically a mature network, and now it's time to close down that network. And this is exactly what happened here. This is the final network. You can see that the colors have now changed. We've basically blacklisted all devices and all accounts in the network. There is also this additional new connection. So this basically was the original network. We've basically minimized or closed down that network. We've blocked it. And we can still track devices that was in this network that are now trying to attach to new accounts. And this is what this part here at the bottom is. So after we close this network down, the orchestrators of the stack try to connect to new devices and new accounts, but on each occasion now the devices and are basically on a blacklist, so there will be no account access. Specifically, the technology that we use here is basically our device fingerprinting models, where we can generate basically persistent, unique devices for both browsers as well as devices. And even in the case of the device being, cleared, the app being reinstalled or the device being reset, that device ID is persistent. So once the device is basically blacklisted, the fraudsters will have to get new devices to attack again. That devices basically become obsolete for them to perform their actions. Yeah, that's basically got an interesting case study that I wanted to share, and I will hand it back to Suleiman and Robbie. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gerrit. 2 points here. First one, this is so cool. This looks like what I used to watch in Hollywood movies like 5 years ago. I'm seeing this in real life now. Second, just based on your observation, when do you determine, or can the customer determine when to actually do that blocking action? What size does the network have to grow for it to take action?
It's really up to the client to decide this. We obviously give them good advice. So you don't want to block the network too quickly, because then you don't, it's like you don't basically disable the network. You sort of just hinder it, and they can continue. So once we start seeing that the network is not growing anymore, that is typically the time where we want to, what we call basically the network has become mature. So all the sort of the hidden parts have been exposed. That is typically the time that we advise our clients to block it. But prior to the blocking, certainly, or not the blocking, the blacklisting, but definitely prior to blacklisting, we do block devices, specifically suspicious devices in the network from the onset. So we don't want those devices to do any harm. They can still access accounts, or they can still attempt to access the account, but they're basically blocked from entering the account, but they're not blacklisted. So the recommendation here would be to the clients is that to block these devices from the outset, so they can't do any harm, but to allow them to try and attempt to attack as many accounts as possible, so we can build a bigger network. And then once we've got the stable network, then to blacklist all the devices.
Amazing. Thank you, Gerrit. Suleiman, I'll come back to you now. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So let's talk about fraud prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're like Gerrit started the conversation of how we can solve this. This is a continuation of this conversation, but from maybe the product side and like more high level of how we can actually help here. So when it comes to fraud prevention, we've deployed these different engines to help us basically overcome the account takeover problem that we stated earlier, right? So we have the network detection that Gerrit walked us through it, right? So we understand, okay, how are the devices that are accessing my system are interconnected with each other? Do they exhibit any signal of being part of a fraud ring or a fraud hotspot? We have also other controls that maybe we did not go through in details today. We have something called fraud hotspot detection. Again, it's important to understand where the access of my system is coming from. But here from this side, we are interested and focused on the geographical locations and whether they constitute a fraud hotspot or not. You have user behavior analysis and anomaly detection. You have automated action builder. We have a lot of other engines that help us basically to have a core fraud prevention that is powered by AI. So this is in a nutshell from a decisioning perspective. But when it comes to the product perspective, we've we've been talking a lot about the first product, which is device risk. I want to also move to a newly established product that we've just launched. We started out by solving account takeover. We had a lot of insights. We were able to have a huge impact, and this is all related to device risk. However, we understood, or like we noticed that, okay, there is a gap that we need to work on that allows us basically to have a permanent device ID that does not change. And this is why we built device fingerprinting. Device fingerprinting complements our current offering and allows you to have further capability. Device risk is basically, device fingerprinting is a product, is an SDK-based product, where we basically will ask the client, will ask you as an institution to have an SDK on top of your application layer. So imagine that you have an iOS app, you have an Android app. We'll inject an SDK layer that collects information from the customer, from their devices. And the goal here is to have a persistent device ID, right? Now, you might ask, like for my being non-technical people, okay, why do you do this, right? So what happened is that Apple and Google basically disallowed, from a while back, disallowed users and clients and institutions from collecting the true device ID, right? So if you have an application in iOS today, you get a device ID from Apple. However, this device ID is not persistent, meaning that it actually can change with time, right? They give you something called application ID rather than the true device ID, and they did this out of concerns around privacy and whatnot. So each application within iOS or Android or even browsers will have a device ID that is unique for that customer for that set of time and could change easily. So for example, if I have bank XYZ account or I have an e-commerce platform's account, the ID that I get could change easily if the customer, for example, deleted the app and installed the app again. Simply that. Like when you do that, even though it's the same phone, it's the same customer, the ID will be different. And the implication of this is the following. Like if you have a fraudster and you caught that fraudster with device risk or like other techniques, you want to block them, right? And this is typically the action that happens, right? You want to block them and you want to block them permanently. But what happens is that, okay, you block that customer, you block that fraudster, and then they recognize this. And what they do is basically just install the app, install it again, uninstall the app and install it again. And voila, they have now a new device ID and you have no like idea of that fact, right? So device fingerprinting allows you to have that capability. Okay, even if they do this, right? What we do is we take a lot of information from the device to make it harder to disguise who you truly are, and then utilize our engines, some machine learning model at the back end, and then utilize and send back to you a unique device fingerprint that does not change, right? Even if they do like installing the app and installing it again, even if they do like a factory reset, actually, right? We will know that actually this is the device that is associated with risky behavior or fraudulent behavior, and you'll be able to permanently block them. So this is in a nutshell why we have this and how it helps also with account takeover and other applications and other use cases. Now, if you remove like these are like maybe a few of the key let's say features that you'll have. Again, now you have a multi-device profiling capability, because now you're not only looking at the device ID that Apple and Android and like the browser is giving you, but actually you have a unique device profiling, like multi-layer profiling capabilities through the SDKs. Block repeated fraudulent devices. We talked about that earlier. It's like once you block someone, you block them permanently and once and for all. And you have anomaly pattern detection again if they try to deceive you, if they try to do further things. Like they don't only do just installing and uninstalling the app or like doing factory reset. They do a lot of things from a device perspective, they try to spoof the true identity of the device. Device fingerprinting allows you to overcome this. So they'll use emulators, they'll try to jailbreak and all of these activities will be captured through the SDK and then enable you to overcome them. And combined with the fraud, the device risk that we talked about, you'll be able to have an advanced and enhanced fraud networks that Gerrit walked us through. Again, the benefits here are like operational cost reduction. Again, now you have automated of all of these processes. You'll have a reduction of other activities so that you can actually focus on other things as a fraud manager or like someone who's responsible for reducing fraud. Now you can interact with the business stakeholders, help them launch new products and all of that while safekeeping and protecting your systems. Increase customer retention. Again, it's like an impact because now another thing that we haven't talked a lot about before is that falsely flagging someone is really bad for the business, right? So what happens from our experience is that institutions yo-yo between two extremes. At one extreme, they have very loose controls. Fraudsters get in. They see a lot of huge surge of fraudulent activities, and then they react immediately, and they go to the other extreme, which is a very strict set of controls, and that aspect they actually disallow normal customers, legitimate customers, good paying customers from accessing their control, from accessing their banking account. I'm pretty sure that happens to few of you on this. Like you go to an app and you cannot really transfer money, right? And this is really the result of them not understanding or like not being able to differentiate between who's a real customer and who's not. So they go to the extreme of blocking everyone and rejecting everyone. So they yo-yo between loose controls and this is really bad for customer retention. Improved compliance and risk management. Again, that's another expected element because again, you have now a more robust control, and this combined with some fraud losses or reduction of fraud losses because now you can actually target the real customer and target the real fraudster and disallow them from accessing the system.
Amazing. We want to give some time to the audience. Does anyone have any questions on what's been discussed today by either two speakers? We'd be happy to answer. I think we have a question from Rehan. Guys, go ahead, unmute yourself and you can ask.
Hi, Rabiul. Sorry, I just got, it was grayed out earlier, so now I just got the access. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much for the information. I just have a quick question. Now, I'm actually in KSA, and we have SAMA regulations, and SAMA regulations requests the institutions, the banks to have multi-factor authentication through NAFAT, through IVR call, through SMS text, OTP. So there's multi-layer verification for customers. So how's ATO being conducted in KSA, for example? I'm just thinking of SIM swapping. Usually when you do a SIM swap, you go to, for example, if I'm a fraudster, I'll go to another provider. If I'm at STC, I'll go to Mobily. Usually Mobily will send a NAFAT authentication to my my phone, and then I have to do a verification. Yes, this is me that I'm doing this this swap, and then that'll be approved. So how does that come into play when your program or your FOCAL system is actually looking into these kind of ATOs that's happening?
Suleiman, I'll
Yeah,
hand it over to
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. So I think your question revolves around actually how fraudsters overcome like the multiple layers of protection that are in place in Saudi, right? So in Saudi, like you have NAFAD, you have like the two-factor authentication within the bank, yet still you find people cracking through this and being able to overcome and take over the accounts, right? That's the question.
Sure. Yes.
So I think the magic word here is like the single, like what happens is the following. No matter how many layers you have in terms of like two-factor authentication and other layers, if you have a weak link in this chain, this is where fraud will strike, and this is where the chain breaks, right? So you are as good as, or your fraud prevention is as strong as your weakest link. In this analogy, the weakest link is really the customer, unfortunately, right? And this is like what we have seen happening here globally and everywhere. Like, we're really fortunate in Saudi that we have NAFAD, we have centralized KYC, and all of that like really help. However, like the fraud typologies are the same. Like the fraudsters will look at the weakest link and then attack them. And in this instance is the customer. And what happens is that they social engineer them to share information they shouldn't. Again, it happens across different segments of the population. What really happens is that they wait and they send mass messages and mass calls to a lot of people, and a certain percentage of this population that they send to will be vulnerable at that time. And maybe they're expecting something, they're expecting a delivery, they're expecting a call from someone. And once that happened, if it's a call, they'll get the OTP from them from NAFAD. Or they'll ask them to actually go to NAFAD and actually verify because like in order to satisfy the service that this customer is looking for, they need to do that. Otherwise, it will not process, right? So the actual customer will go to NAFAD, for example, and actually verify that someone is trying to do a SIM swap or someone is trying to open a new account on their name, right? So once they do that, now the fraudster have that activity, right? Or a combination of both, right? So this is really what happens, that like they attack the single vulnerability, and typically it's the customer. And as a customer, you really have the full control to this. Like as a system, really, if it's the customer, then it's very hard to overcome, right? What we actually, as like maybe related to the question, like how do we actually, like the insight that we got is the following: like you or non-transparent from what is the location, what's the IP, and all of that. The idea is simply put, okay, let's use this to develop a profile of the customer. And if anything deviates, and we utilize technology to help us here. If anything changes, then this is the behavior, and you the customer, their own device, the fraudster will have another device. If that happens and they are like the GPS location, for example, does not match the IP location, the device speed, like a lot of technical terms that I'm walking through. Like there are multiple ways where you can basically, the idea here is that there are multiple ways for you to understand, you know what? This is not my
Awesome. Thank you, Suleiman. We only have about 2 minutes left. So I do want to thank everyone for joining us. Is there a short question that has, we have maybe time, 30 seconds for a question. You can go ahead and unmute and just ask. Okay, if not, if you do come up with something, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to do the closeout. Thank you, Suleiman. Thank you, Gerrit, for this session. Really a good insight for us. Thank you, everyone who joined the webinar today from Riyadh and beyond. This was, we really appreciate your attendance and such. I see we do have one last question. If you'd like to ask, the meeting might shut off if we don't get to it. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself if you like. But thank you again. Please reach out to us. Our contact information is here. We're happy to answer any further questions.
Guys, and we can definitely set up a session with them if needed, right? Yeah, that's another alternative also.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, again, and hope you have a good day. And we'll see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.